I'm Aaron Graber with Ventrac, and today we're at my house and we're moving a lot of wood chip mulch. So on my property, I have a massive project in the backyard where I am building a food forest. A food forest is a concept where you plant a bunch of different perennial plants, and the goal is to end up having basically a system where you kind of are hands-off, and it's kind of the lazy man's garden. What that's going to require is about 2,000 yards of wood chips, which sounds crazy, and it is a little bit, but I've got a local tree service that delivers wood chips to me whenever they have an excess or whenever they're in the area. They drop them off, and I'm very grateful for that. Wood chips are great because they replicate what nature would do automatically. If you walk into the forest and you just look around and look underneath and maybe dig away to the dirt underneath, the dirt is really super nice under there. It's aerated very well, it's not compacted. And the reason it's like that is because it has years and years and years of fallen, decayed branches and leaves and just debris of all sorts of variety, and it just layers. And basically what nature does is it builds its own layer garden. By doing that, we keep the temperature a little bit more stable. It stays warmer longer into the fall and retains moisture better all throughout the year. And what that does is protects the soil from erosion. It traps all the nutrients. It builds super good soil. So the goal is that once this is a functioning system, basically you never water anything. You never worry about that because it takes care of itself. And once it grows dense enough, all the foliage that falls and all of the stuff that you hack off and let fall and decay kind of keeps rebuilding, and so the system takes care of itself in perpetuity. And wood chips help do that from the start because they're an instant way to get a good hardy layer of biodegradable mass onto the soil and trapping moisture and water and starting to build the soil from the top down as well. Last year, during the middle of August, July time, we were kind of in a drought here. We hadn't had rain for probably 6 weeks. And I walked out to the Veggie Garden for the first time in a while, and I took about 2 to 3 inches away, and it was completely saturated underneath that. So it was a great medium to grow things like vegetables that need constant water in an environment where you don't have that consistency, and when I just don't have the time to water it daily or every other day. So I'm not your typical gardener who enjoys spending hours and hours and hours just meticulously tending to things. I'd rather kind of take an efficiency approach to it. And that is another thing that is an advantage with the wood chips because they suppress weeds, which are the bane of my existence when I'm growing things because I don't want to pull them, I don't want to deal with them, I don't want to have to spray them for sure because I don't want those chemicals in the food I'm growing. So the thing that the wood chips do is they snuff out weeds and they don't let them germinate because they keep the temperature too warm for the seeds to germinate. And also any weed seeds that would be in the soil, which there are millions all over the place. Every time you till, you're going to bring those back up. So any of those seeds that would be in the surface, they cover them and keep them from getting any light and getting any chance to sprout up and start robbing any nutrients from the vegetables around them. The few weeds that do pop up are so loose and they have such a terrible root structure because they've had to snake through all the wood chips to get out. I can go over and I can pluck them out just with my bare hands, no effort at all. So it's really easy to do. Given the weed explanation, you might wonder how things that I want to grow actually grow in the garden. And that's a great question because you have to be very careful when you plant. What you're doing is you're taking the wood chips and you're scraping them away, getting back down to the soil. You're planting your vegetables or whatever plants into the soil. And then once they get big enough and they can handle it, then you're brushing the wood chips back up to them so that they close off that soil and keep them moist and give the vegetables a chance to really spring up and be very productive. So now that we've given a background of my crazy project that I'm doing, we do need to address why is it on this channel? Well, first of all, because it's me, and we thought it'd be interesting. But second of all, what I've been moving all of this mulch with, this wood chip mulch, is the Ventrac 4500 and the power bucket with mulch extensions. And that has been invaluable, and there's a few reasons why. I planted most of this area before getting the mulch. Well, that poses a very big problem because I'm also planting pretty dense in this system. So when I go to dump wood chips and I go to move them around, I am almost always right next to a plant or a tree or a shrub or something that I don't want to crush. So it makes it impossible to do anything in this area with a machine other than pretty much a Ventrac, because it's so compact, because it articulates, because it also oscillates and allows me to drive up and over mounds of things easier and not be unstable. There's a lot of different options for using equipment to do this. You could go the hand labor route, which just clearly isn't going to work for the scale of project that this is. You could go with a much bigger machine, which would be nice if it was possible, if you could really do it. But what I found is that even though the Ventrac is a little bit smaller capacity-wise, it's actually faster than a little bit bigger bucket on a compact tractor or a skid steer, because you have to be so careful with those, and you have to drive in straight lines only, and you really basically end up not being able to use them in a lot of areas of the food forest because things are already planted. But the Ventrac allows me to get right up next to a plant or a tree and see exactly where I'm dumping, exactly what I'm doing, and be very careful about where I'm putting things and what impact I'm making on everything around me. To date, I've probably got about 50 different varieties of fruit trees and other edible plants in this system. And that might amount to 100, 150 individual plants, because some of them are doubled or tripled up. My goal is to just keep going until there's no more space. So I want to just keep putting new plants in and expanding the space until the density is such that there's really no more room to do anything like that. And the reason I want to do that is because I want the ultimate in biodiversity, and I want a lot of variety of things that I can eat personally. And I want to try new things that are hard to find in grocery stores around here or farmers markets. And I want to have things growing on this property that help to build the system into a fully functioning, self-sustaining food system that keeps itself up and helps expand itself anywhere that it may. So here we are in the garden, and we're just going to take a quick tour, kind of show you around what we're working with, why we're doing things here. So the first thing we'll look at is over here. This is the Veggie Garden that I was talking about before. And this, I have a Veggie Garden over on the other bottom side of the hill, and this one here. This one is actually a hugelkultur bed, a small one. So it's not super tall or deep, but it's very big. Underneath this plot, this gray area, are probably 5 or 6 full-size ash trees cut up and layered down. And that's a whole nother concept, but hugelkultur is kind of, you're putting wood underneath the soil, and that also helps with water retention and decomposition and just temperature control, that sort of thing. But it still functions the same as the rest of this on the top, because over top of that wood is probably a foot or so of topsoil, and then these wood chips. And this is a good example of what we're talking about. So these were raked out at the end of last year and haven't been touched since. You can see they're kind of sunburnt, just gray, and nothing's happened to these in a while. But we haven't gotten rain in a few days, so it actually is kind of dry right now, even though it's in spring. And this stuff you can see is really dry on top. There's almost nothing to it, and you can see if you just lightly brush it, it's a little bit powder. You can see there's some dust, but it doesn't take much. You just take one little swipe here and look underneath, and you can see it's completely wet under here. All that moisture is working away. If you see this right here, all this decomp happening, that's what you want to see, because that stuff is breaking down the wood chips and eventually will be some of the best soil you've ever seen. So that's in the first 2 to 3 inches, and we've got probably a foot of wood chips on this area, even though it doesn't quite look like it because they're pretty compacted. This is a good example of pulling weeds through the wood chips. So what I do is I taper down towards the tree, and that way, a lot of trees are mulched improperly. They just put mulch and they pile it up, and it goes right up to the base of the tree, and it kind of looks like this. And that's actually the wrong way to do it, because it's not good for the health of the tree. So your mulch needs to be taller on the outside, tapering down to the tree. And what that results in are weeds closer towards the tree just because the mulch is a lot thinner. And what I was talking about earlier is it makes it easy for management of these weeds, because since they have to fight to get through, their root structures are really weak. And here's a cluster of grass, and you just pull it straight out. I mean, very loose under there, the soil's not compacted, and this basically, it had to do a lot of work to get out to the top. The roots aren't very good, it just comes right out. And there's no seed pods or anything on this, so just throw it on top, let it decay, and that's just more organic matter. This area here is where I'm going to hole in some of my trees that I'm going to start with rootstocks and just grow some different varieties of things, test. Those trees will grow in here, and then I'll swipe them out of that area and put them where I want to later. This transitional area is just mulched purely because I don't want to mow it. This right here is a full-size cherry tree, a baby full-size. It will be one day. And that's kind of the concept. So if you look out over this area, this inner line right here are all of the full-size trees. So you go from cherry to a Lovell almond, to just past that is the jujube, and then after that you have a mulberry, a black walnut, and around the corner you have a persimmons and another Lovell almond. And those trees are all full-size trees, and trees that will grow to be anywhere between 40 and 80 feet tall probably. And so that's the tallest layer. This is the north side. We've got north, south, east, and west. So the north side has all the tall trees, and then the whole thing will taper down from there. So right after these, you've got the semi-dwarf fruit trees. You've got a row of apples, and then a row of pears and nectarines, and then a dwarf cherry behind those. And those will be continuing to be planted with other fruit trees down through the next row. And then after that, if you want to walk over here, so this is an apple tree. I don't know what kind, but it doesn't matter because I'm going to plant all kinds. This is a pear tree. So you can kind of see, these were planted well before I started any of this, so they're a little more symmetrical than I would like now, but eventually they'll fill out, and they're planted a little bit close, but that's on purpose because we want everything to be super dense and touching and just sharing all of their root systems and everything. So after the dwarf and semi-dwarf fruit trees, we start seeing things like your hazelnuts are here, and then over here we've got blueberries. Over here we've got raspberries, and then kind of filtering over to all of our gooseberries and currants and everything else that is of that size. Just put this one over for now. And the goal will be to kind of mimic this structure all the way down. And then the further we get towards the south, this stuff I haven't really planted yet because it's the fastest growing, so it's been the lowest on my priority list. But along this whole southern tier, we're gonna have all of the ground cover stuff. So that will be your strawberries, your herbs and mints, and a bunch of other different varieties of things. And then the last layer is your vines. So your vines, well, I also haven't planted yet. We're gonna be doing a bunch of hardy kiwis, which yes, they do grow in Ohio. They're about the size of a large grape, or maybe even a little bit larger than that. They're not like the full-size kiwis, and they're not fuzzy, but they do grow very well here. We're gonna be planting those basically back towards the tallest layer and let those climb initially some posts and trellis, and then eventually one day, hopefully, some of the taller trees. And then that will tie everything together, and that'll be your last layer of the food forest. But the goal will be, once we're done here, like right now it's springtime, you can see through everything, it just looks kind of bare. The goal will be that one day you could stand at any corner of this and not see through to the other side. It'll be that thick and lush, and everything will be growing, and you'd be basically just walk through paths through the woods, and everything you see is edible.